Good morning and welcome to World News here on TVP World. I'm your host, Diana Skaya. Trade war or economic revolution? The battle over U.S. tariffs is taking a new turn. U.S. President Donald Trump has called it Liberation Day for America as he unveiled a new wave of tariffs targeting some 100 countries and trading blocs. Now, while some of those countries will face a 10% baseline tariff, the European Union will be hit with a 20% rate. Standing in the Rose Garden of the White House, Trump also announced a 25% tariff on all foreign-made vehicles.
So, if you look at that, China, first row, China, 67%. That's tariffs charged to the USA, including currency manipulation and trade barriers. So, 67%, I think you can, for the most part, see it. At the same time, we will establish a minimum baseline tariff of 10%. You notice that on the chart? And that'll be on other countries to help rebuild our economy and to prevent cheating. Terminate your own tariffs, drop your barriers, don't manipulate your currencies. They manipulate their currencies like nobody can even believe, which is a bad, bad thing and very devastating to us.
During his speech on Wednesday, Donald Trump displayed a chart listing the countries subject to higher tariffs, which what we saw with the European Union, China, and Vietnam facing rates of 20%, 54%, and 46% respectively. Other countries in what Trump called the worst offenders group were Japan and Taiwan. Now, these duties will go into effect on April 9th. But other allies will also face new tariffs, including a 10% base rate for the UK. Other countries in this group include Singapore, Brazil, Australia, and New Zealand. The White House said the United States would start charging the 10% tariffs on April 5th. The 10% baseline rate does not apply to Canada and Mexico, as they have already been targeted. The pre-existing 25% tariffs on most Mexican and Canadian goods will remain in place. President Trump also confirmed the beginning of a new American 25% tariff on all foreign-made automobiles, which went into effect almost immediately at midnight local time. And now we look into some of the responses to those tariffs, starting with commentary by the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, in the early hours of Thursday morning. Now, the leader said that the European Union is preparing for further countermeasures against the new wave of U.S. tariffs.
We have always been ready to negotiate with the United States to remove the remaining barriers to transatlantic trade. At the same time, we are prepared to respond. We are already finalizing the first package of countermeasures in response to tariffs on steel. And we're now preparing for further countermeasures to protect our interests and our businesses if negotiations fail. We will also be watching closely what indirect effects these tariffs could have, because we cannot absorb global overcapacity, nor will we accept dumping on our markets. And Europe will stand at the side of those directly impacted. We have already announced new measures to support the steel and cars sectors. Last week, we limited the amount of steel that can be imported to Europe tariff-free. This will give more breathing space to these strategic industries. Now, we will also convene strategic dialogues with the steel, the automotive, and the pharmaceutical sectors, and others will follow. Europe stands together.
Now, reactions to those new tariffs imposed by Trump are coming in from all across the European Union. Among the first to share their opinions on those new levies were Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, along with his Swedish and Italian counterparts.
Friendship means partnership. Partnership means really and truly reciprocal tariffs. Adequate decisions are needed. It is free enterprise and free competition that have laid the foundation for the prosperity of the West. That is why Americans can listen to music on Swedish Spotify and we Swedes can listen to the same music on American iPhones. Therefore, I deeply regret that the US has now embarked on a path where it wants to restrict trade through increased tariffs.
Därför beklagar jag djupt.
Full support for the EU Commission in trade negotiations with the US. Trade is a powerful engine of global prosperity. The EU will remain the staunch advocate for free and fair trade. We will engage with all our partners and continue to strengthen and expand our trade network. Now is the time to ratify the agreements with Mercosur, Mexico, and decisively advance in the negotiations with India and other key partners.
The introduction by the US of tariffs against the European Union is a measure that I consider to be wrong and not in the interests of either party. We will do everything we can to work on an agreement with the United States, with the aim of averting a trade war that would inevitably weaken the West in favor of other global players. In any case, as always, we will act in the interests of Italy and its economy, including by engaging with our other European partners.
Well, there are no winners in trade wars, and it's clear that all these tariffs will raise prices for the consumers, and in the end, we get to pay for everything. So, of course, the defense cooperation that we have with the Americans is also very important. And when we have the white paper, then we are also thinking about what more can we do for our own defense industry, because we are buying a lot from the Americans right now, but we need to diversify our portfolio so that we would have capabilities to produce here the ammunition and things we need here, and also to be able to buy from other allies so that we have a diversified portfolio in this regard.
In an interview for TVP World, the economist Witold Orłowski shared his insights on the recent slate of tariffs imposed by President Trump. In his view, also criticizing that the tariffs are a solution to global trade issues. Here's what he had to say on that.
For example, he already said that the EU was created to screw America, basically to cheat it on everything, and so on and so on. So this is a certain vision of the world, a vision of the economy in which taxes. Well, once again, quoting Mr. Trump from, I guess, 2 or 3 months ago, as he said, tariffs is the most beautiful word in the vocabulary. Well, let me say something like that. Anybody who knows anything about the economics knows that this is not true. That basically, and that's a knowledge that is common in economics has been common for at least 200 years, that if two countries cooperate, if they start to specialize in production, then both benefits.
Increased defense investment will be the key item on the agenda of today's NATO Foreign Ministers Summit in Brussels. Now, apart from expanding defense budgets, the officials are set to discuss the war in Ukraine and relations with partners from the Indo-Pacific region. We now go live to our correspondent, Angela Skujins, who is in the Belgian capital. Good morning, Angela. So what can we expect from today's meeting?
Yes, so there are 2 things on the official docket today. The first is scaling up defence spending. This is a major cornerstone of the NATO military alliance. We have those 32 foreign ministers here to discuss that, as well as shoring up support for Ukraine as it battles another year of Russian invasion. We know that the EU top foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, will be in attendance today. We're expecting her to lobby those ministers to buy in to her military initiative for Ukraine. As it currently stands, it would be roughly 2 million rounds of ammunition that is to help Ukraine on the front lines. This is a direct plea that we heard from the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky when he was recently in the Belgian capital. But on the sidelines of this, many are wondering how the US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, will interact with his NATO allies. We know that he is expected to meet the Danish foreign minister. It comes off the back of US President Donald Trump's aggressive overtures to acquire the Arctic island of Greenland either by force or through monetary means. So we are not totally sure whether we're going to get a readout of that, but many here are waiting with anticipation how that will go. Also, with how the US will speak to its NATO allies in terms of defence spending. We've heard US President Donald Trump chastise those NATO allies for not meeting that target, but that target will also be firmed up at the Hague Summer Summit. So we're expecting a more formal figure to come out of them. But that's all from Brussels, and I'll be reporting to you when more developments roll in.
Thank you so much, Angela Skujins. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has arrived in Budapest for a meeting with his Hungarian counterpart Viktor Orban. Now, Netanyahu, wanted by the International Criminal Court, received a red carpet welcome in Hungary. Soldiers secured his arrival, and the Israeli leader was greeted by Hungarian officials. Netanyahu and Orban are to hold a press conference on Thursday. The Israeli Prime Minister is expected to stay in Hungary for 4 days. The visit comes despite an arrest warrant after Netanyahu over allegations of war crimes in Gaza. Hungary is a founding member of the International Criminal Court, and Budapest is theoretically obliged to arrest Netanyahu. However, Viktor Orban made it clear that Hungary will not enforce the ruling. And what we're seeing right now on screens there, we have it, is our images live from Budapest. There we see Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu standing next to Viktor Orban in a ceremony that is about to begin. Moving on now to Ukraine. Kharkiv was the target of another Russian overnight drone strike. In a post on Telegram, Kharkiv Mayor Ihor Terechov wrote that 14 Russian drones struck the city over the course of 40 minutes.
No casualty numbers have been released yet, but authorities have reported damage to residential buildings. Kharkiv region officials said this was the second massive Russian drone attack on the city in the past 24 hours. The first strike wounded at least 5 people, including a 10-year-old boy. On Wednesday, 4 people were killed and 14 more wounded in a Russian missile attack on the city of Kryvyi Rih in central Ukraine. According to preliminary reports provided by the regional authorities, the city was targeted with a ballistic missile. The victims included children, with one now listed as being in critical condition. Kharkiv and Kryvyi Rih, where President Zelensky comes from, are regular targets of Russian attacks.
On Wednesday, British Foreign Minister David Lammy and Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić met to discuss the actions of Bosnian Serb leader Milorad Dodik. The talks, however, did not bring the two officials to an agreement. Lammy said that Dodik had taken, quote, unconstitutional actions, while Vučić went on to say that both sides are responsible for the mounting tensions. Now, their meeting comes amid growing international concern over Dodik's separatist rhetoric and actions, which have heightened tensions in the Balkans.
We've begun to discuss my concerns, President Dodik's unconstitutional actions, and how we reinvigorate the Kosovo-Serbia normalization. We have also begun to discuss recent developments here in Serbia. I've seen, of course, the huge protests since the tragedy in Novi Sad, and I offer heartfelt condolences to all who lost loved ones. This is a conversation between Serbia's government and its citizens, exercising their right to peaceful protest.
We also discussed regional issues. Regardless of our differences on the issue of Kosovo and Metohija, both sides believe that dialogue is of key importance and that talks should resolve problems and bring compromise solutions. Regarding the situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina, we do not share the opinion of who is responsible of the situation, and I cannot agree that Milorad Dodik is the culprit or the only culprit in the situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I call on everyone around the world to try to find a compromise solution, to try to find a negotiated solution.
And that's all for this edition of World News here on TVP World. I'm Diana Skaya. Thanks for watching.